Great. Well, we can introduce Todd. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me this evening. I really appreciate everybody coming out. Okay, all right. And just a fair warning, I'm going to have some remarks, and then we're going to show a short video. So I'm going to break for a second, go over here, and bear with me as I work with John on some of the AV stuff. I'm going to come back and wrap up. It's good to be among friends and to meet some new faces here. Those who read the Reader since 1993 know that we're equal opportunity critics at the Reader. That we're transpartisan watchdogs. And hopefully those that read us know that we strive not only to critique problems, expose issues, and promote dialogue, but we also strive to explore solutions. To that end, I am grateful to have the opportunity to visit with you all this evening about the question, do Americans have standing anymore? From the ACLU's website, their history, the U.S. Supreme Court had yet to uphold a single free speech claim when Roger Baldwin, Crystal Eastman, Albert DeSilva, and others formed the ACLU in 1920. Activists languished in jail for distributing anti-war literature. State-sanctioned violence against African Americans was routine. Women won the right to vote only in August of that year. Constitutional rights for lesbians and gays, bisexual and transgender people in those days were unthinkable. At the top of this page, it says what the Bill of Rights guarantees. Your First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, association, and assembly, freedom of the press, and freedom of religion. There's one thing missing at the ACLU's website, and it's right here on this card there, and it is the much forgotten fifth element of the First Amendment, the last 10 words of the First Amendment. The government shall not infringe on our rights to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That is core to the question, do Americans have standing anymore? Since 1920, the ACLU has been standing up for individual rights when they are violated by governments big and small, from exercising free speech in small town high schools to fighting the Justice Department, who recently has claimed that when we buy the services of a cell phone company, we have given up our Fourth Amendment right to privacy, requiring no probable cause or warrant for law enforcement to track your location and communications. The ACLU has been fighting this very hard. The ACLU works on behalf of Americans to protect their individual rights, whether it's prevailing once again in Davenport, Iowa, to allow free speech and petitioning at a street festival on public property, or creating awareness nationwide about fusion centers and the threat these emerging mashups of law enforcement pose with no oversight or authority granted by the people. Isn't it paradoxical that the entities we the people constructed to protect our rights are often the biggest violators of our rights? It really brings to bear what the founders knew when they began this bold experiment. The government needs to be held in check with enumerated authorities, as well as a series of thou shall nots, also known as the Bill of Rights. I'm always fascinated by modern day Americans' perception and subsequent belief as to where our rights come from. A good example is a USA Today online poll that has been floating around the internet for years. It asks, the Second Amendment gives us the right to bear arms, yes or no? And of course, 95% of the respondents continue to respond yes, more than 95%. Clearly, it's a trick question, as the Second Amendment nor the founding documents themselves give or grant anything to the people. The people are the authors of this construct. And the Bill of Rights states what rights the government shall not infringe upon, not what rights we are granted. So where do one's rights come from? Depending on your own philosophy, our rights are unalienable, unalienable, natural, and or God-given. Pick one. But our rights are most certainly not given to us by the government or the Constitution that created our servant government. I want to reemphasize this. The Bill of Rights do not grant us any rights. They serve to protect our rights. All humans have these rights prior to any establishment of government by consent, by limiting government's ability to infringe upon them. The Constitution is based on natural law, and today's government and those who stand to benefit from the government's abuse of our rights would have you believe our rights are secured by the rule of the majority. But the founders knew we'd get into these dire circumstances, and they did build an accountability clause into the First Amendment. There's 5 thou shall nots in the First Amendment. Shall not infringe on free speech, religion, press, association, and the 5th element of the First Amendment is the government shall not infringe on the people's right to redress of grievances. It's an aspect of the First Amendment that goes unheralded in modern day mainstream circles. Its origins go back to the Magna Carta. In fact, it's been argued in the Supreme Court writ of certiorari that the rest of the First Amendment rights are all actually derivatives of the right to petition. That without the other rights, you could not petition. In fact, the right to petition was exercised regularly in America up until the 1830s, until the southern states got tired of hearing the abolitionists petition, and a procedural measure was passed to preclude the petitions from being heard, and this has continued on through this day. The ACLU themselves have run flat into this. They had a case, just give me 1 second, I'm going to pull this up. 2005, the nation learned that President Bush had repeatedly authorized the NSA to monitor phone calls and emails of the people of the United States without a warrant, warrantless wiretapping. The ACLU stepped up to the plate. They won the first round of its legal challenge in August of 2006 when the U.S. District Court Judge Anna Diggs Taylor ruled the NSA program violates the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act in her ACLU v. NSA decision. It was never the intent of the framers to give the president such unfettered control, she wrote. In July 2007, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed the case. NSA appealed it. It went up the ladder. They ruled the plaintiffs in the case, which includes scholars, journalists, national nonprofit organizations, had no standing to sue because they could not state with certainty that they had been wiretapped by the NSA. This is just one example. I mean, you can see the circular logic here, right? I mean, this is just one example of the hypocrisy that prevails. So what are the next steps for a free people? I mean, the ACLU has been fighting this battle since 1920. And when you get it all the way up the ladder and the government decides to say,
work, see the second one.
You know, you don't have standing. You know, your right to petition for redress of grievances, stop. The merits of the case aren't even heard. Last spring, about almost a year ago, a gentleman named Bob Schulz, who's the chairman of We the People Foundation, stopped in Davenport on his nationwide tour. Mr. Schulz, I've only heard of him recently. Several friends of mine said, hey, we should go check this guy out, and did a little research on him. And sure enough, he's been up to some hard work, much like the ACLU has over the years. He's been petitioning for redress of grievances for 14 years. His first one was the illegal bombing of Yugoslavia during the Clinton administration. And there's a whole litany of things he's argued. He was on a nationwide tour because he had run smack dab in the same thing the ACLU had run into, and that was he had been told he had no standing for all of his petitions. And so he asked himself, what's the next step for free people? And he took a page from our founder's history book, and that was after 11 years of repeated petitions to the Crown, the colonists said, we're not getting anywhere. They're only coming back with repeated injury. What are we going to do? What's the next step? And they decided to convene a Continental Congress in order to determine what the next appropriate steps would be. That's what Mr. Schulz was doing a year ago, touring the country. He did 88 cities in 50 states. Davenport was one of them. We got to know him here. I ended up working with him. I've worked with him closely ever since. I have a video we're going to show here, and it's the actual promotional video for the Continental Congress. How many here have even heard that we had a modern-day Continental Congress in November last year, just out of curiosity? Yeah, we've got some work to do, definitely. I'll be right back. We're going to do this old school because the speakers aren't that great.
Established Continental Congress. That's the problem. It was just basically a leading event.
I know. There's a method to the madness, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We actually tested this earlier.
right?